Some may say that not a lot happened in episode 7 of Pluribus, but I would say this was a classic show not tell type of episode. And something we saw that really stood out to me was when Carol went to check out some paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe and decided to take one home, a painting she already had a copy of, titled Belladonna. Then, after about 40 days of having no direct contact with the joined, she's staring at the painting at the exact moment when Zosha comes back, after Carol finally asked them to return. And that timing feels way too deliberate to be a coincidence. So in this video, I want to dig into the deeper meanings lurking behind this painting, because the show could have picked any painting by any artist, and yet they picked this one. So let's start with, what does this painting actually show? What are we looking at? It's just two blooms of the plant Atropa belladonna. One of them is facing the front of the image, so you can see the center, the pollen bit, the inside, the most protected part. But the other is slightly behind it, pointing slightly upwards, so you can only see the petals. So one is open and forward-facing, the other is more angled away. And that exact visual choice is where my whole interpretation begins. We get two different positions of the same thing. One bloom is showing its center, while the other is hiding its center. And that already feels like Carol's whole dilemma throughout this episode. The part of her that wants to be seen and known, and the part of her that keeps turning away and staying more reserved. Carol is positioned as the viewer of the artwork, the one who sees, interprets, and feels something through the painting. Her presence is what lets the painting function as an art piece rather than an inert object. Without her there, it's just pigment on a canvas, hanging in an empty museum. Which makes me think of that old philosophical question of, if a tree falls when no one's around, does it make a sound? So in a similar way, I want to ask you, is a painting still art if there is no one there to perceive it? Materially, yes, it exists. But in terms of meaning, art depends on someone, an individual human, seeing it, interpreting it. Without a perceiver, it exists physically, but not meaningfully. And that really reinforces Carol's loneliness. She becomes the one who gives the painting meaning simply by being there with it. She's taking the time to look, to feel something, to load it with interpretation. In that sense, she's performing the role that she longs for someone else to perform for her. She wants someone to sit with her, to really look at her, and let her become real again, to feel alive in their eyes. So those two blooms in the painting are the two internal versions of Carol at the moment, of wanting to be the open flower, the version of her that wants to be seen, versus her current reality of being the more angled away flower, where she's turned away and not fully visible. And because nobody is there to perceive her in the way that she's perceiving the painting, she almost becomes the painter instead, by literally putting herself into the image by going out and painting onto the road, which is reflecting her desire of wanting and needing to be around someone else so that she can feel real and alive and like life is worth living and has meaning again. So I feel like before she initiated contact with the joined, with the others, asking them to come back, she was probably thinking, while looking at the painting, do I exist if no one is here to perceive me? And by making the decision to ask Zosha to come back, she goes from being the background flower of not being fully seen to painting herself into the frame so that she can be seen. And what's really wild is that this lines up almost perfectly with how Georgia O'Keeffe herself talked about her flower paintings and them being seen. She said, "Nobody sees a flower really. It's so small, it takes time. We haven't time. And to see takes time, like to have a friend takes time." So for her, they were never just pretty flowers to paint. She was basically saying, you never really see this thing because you never give it enough time. To see it, to really see it, it takes time. The same way having a real friend takes time. And now look at Carol. She's lost her partner, Helen, and anyone else who was even just slightly meaningful to her. Like her fans, even though she seemed to have such disdain for them, I think she must have, at least in some part of her, appreciated them because they made her a successful author. But now without anyone else left around her, she's the only person who actually has the time to sit and look at this flower painting. She's doing what O'Keeffe always wanted people to do with her art, to really take the time to look at it. But this just enforces Carol's loneliness, because there is no one doing that for Carol, of seeing her. And this also ties into another O'Keeffe quote that could basically be the tagline of this episode, which is, "I found I could say things with colour and shapes that I couldn't say any other way, things I had no words for." That is literally Carol. She cannot verbally say out loud to the others, "I need you, come back, I don't want to be alone anymore." So she reaches for colour and shapes instead, by making that giant painted plea on the road. So there's also this parallel of O'Keeffe making huge flower paintings because people don't have the time to see them otherwise, and Carol painting huge letters because the others have abandoned her and she's longing to be seen again. So by this point, I'd say that the Belladonna painting is a mirror for Carol. She realizes that there is no one else that has the time to look at her or to be her friend, which is exactly the psychological state that makes reconnecting with the others so tempting. The last time Carol interacted in person and directly with the joined was just before she fell asleep in the hospital, and when she woke up, they were gone. Shortly after this, we see a time card of it being 8 days, 22 hours since the joining. So her last real in-person contact with them was probably around day 8. And by this episode, we jump forward to 48 days, 16 hours. So there's been 40 days of Carol being isolated from the others. And choosing it to be 40 days is really interesting, because 40 is a really common symbolic number across different religions and cultures. It nearly always carries the sense that something important is being worked through, and that when the 40 days are over, things are not the same as when they began. So just as a couple of examples, there's the temptation of Christ. In the New Testament, Jesus spends 40 days in the wilderness, fasting and being tempted by Satan, before he begins his public ministry. So in this case, 40 days means trial, temptation, and a hard preparation period before a new phase of life begins. You get something similar in Sufism, with the 40-day retreat known as Khalwa. Someone withdraws from ordinary life, goes into seclusion, prays or meditates, confronts their own ego, and then returns changed, as the retreat is meant to strip you back and remake you. So here, the 40 days means solitude, inner work, and a deep spiritual transformation. And then there's also historical medical practices like the 40-day quarantine in late medieval Europe. Ships arriving from places with plagues or other diseases were kept at a distance for 40 days before anyone was allowed to disembark. And that's where the word quarantine comes from. In Italian, 40 days is 40 giorni. So the idea was that whatever is dangerous or infected has time to burn itself out. So the 40 days here means separation, containment of danger, and only after that are you allowed to return to ordinary life. So when you put all of that together, 40 days throughout history in different parts of the world generally seem to signal a time of testing and transition, where it's long enough for something to be burned off, worked through, reshaped, before you can cross over into whatever comes next. And this is the exact energy the show is tapping into by giving Carol 40 days of isolation. It's telling us that these are days where she's being tested, stripped back, and made ready for a different version of herself. So it's no wonder why the others are almost like a salvation for her now. But the problem is, she doesn't seem to realize that the painting she's now put herself into, so that she can be seen and exist, is actually a pretty dangerous one. The Belladonna itself has so much more symbolism buried within it. So the etymology already tells us a lot. The plant's name is Atropa belladonna. Atropa comes from Atropos from Greek mythology, who is one of the three Moirai, the Fates, and she's the one who cuts the thread of life and decides when it ends. And Belladonna means beautiful woman in Italian, which historically is tied to the fact that women would use extracts from the plant as eye drops to dilate their pupils, which would make them look more doe-eyed and therefore beautiful. But this practice was highly dangerous because the plant is extremely toxic. So it could cause blurred vision and even blindness or death, which is why the common name for this plant is deadly nightshade. So just from the name, we've already got a beautiful woman, but she's capable of ending your life, which is obviously very Zosha the Others coded. But there's even more Greek mythology parallels. First, there's Dionysus, and his whole thing is all about ecstasy and trance possession, losing yourself in wine, music, dance, and mind-altering plants. So the basic pattern in worshipping Dionysus is that you drink, your everyday consciousness dissolves, and you experience a kind of union with the god and the rest of the group. Some later folklore and occult herbalists specifically associated deadly nightshade with these Dionysus rites as one of the plants that would push people into these altered, ecstatic states. And this sounds very the joined coded, right? Like you drink something that's actually poison, but you get to enjoy it as part of a group and become more than yourself, despite the deadly cost. Then there's also Circe, the sorceress from Homer's Odyssey. She mixes potions and enchanted herbs into wine and uses that to transform Odysseus's men into pigs. They drink, stay physically alive, but their form and status change completely. And later writers and botanical folklore bring in the idea that Circe's drinks included plants that were a part of this nightshade family. So it would have included the deadly nightshade. So the pattern here is that you drink the potion, the poison, you remain biologically alive, but your old identity is taken away and replaced with something else. So it's exactly the same structure again of ingest this thing, you will transform and your old self is gone, right? Which is exactly what the others are. You accept the virus, your body is fine, but your old self as an individual gets overwritten. So in the last moments of the episode, when Carol embraces Zosha, the Belladonna becomes Carol's choice of poison. But the Belladonna isn't the only poisonous plant in this episode, because while Carol is being enticed by the Belladonna, Manousos is going through his own poisonous arc. We see how he drives all the way from Paraguay up to the Darien Gap, and how he refuses help from the others at every step. Hanging in his car, we see an image of La Virgen del Carmen, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, in the form of a Catholic scapula. A scapula is a small religious charm, and this one in particular is linked to Mary's veil of protection. And in everyday Catholic belief, you would keep this charm on you for spiritual protection, especially at death, with the idea being, if you die with it, that Mary will help keep you safe and away from hell. And I think it's really interesting that when Manousos decides to burn his car, he decides to leave this religious protection charm to burn in his car rather than taking it with him. So it's almost like maybe he feels even Mary can't protect him for where he's choosing to go now. So we see him then go into the jungle on foot, and he is surrounded by dangerous plants, one of them being the Chunga palm. And of course he ends up literally impaled on such a deadly plant because the long black spines are filled with bacteria, and a wound from them can kill you because you end up getting an infection from the bacteria. So by the end of the episode, we've actually been shown 3 different poisons to choose from. There's Carol's initial poison of choice of isolation and loneliness, and how we see it leads her to not caring about her life because she doesn't move out of the way of the firework going off right in front of her. Then Manousos' poison of being so rigid in his values and morals that he refuses any kind of help from the others, which of course also leads to suffering. But then there's the joins poison, where if you drink the juice, it will erase the self. So it feels like the episode is really asking, what's your choice of poison in this world? And then that raises another question of, if seemingly every option is poisonous, how do you avoid it? Or if you can't avoid it, then what's the antidote? In real toxicology, belladonna poisoning is treated with other drugs, like physostigmine, where they work by rebalancing the nervous system so that the body can function again. So maybe the show is heading towards the kind of antidote to this poisoned world being, how do you stay human and alive when you're trapped inside of a poisoned world? And this could look a few different ways. It could be the combination of Carol and Manousos meeting, where Carol's weakness is currently the temptation to give up and maybe accept joining the hive mind because she's at the point where she can't suffer alone anymore. And Manousos' weakness is the temptation to resist so hard against the others that he just ends up suffering and barely living. So by bringing them together, maybe they'll become the antidotes for each other, where he can remind her that her individuality and autonomy matters, and she can remind him that him actually being alive matters more than sticking to his rigid moral rules. And obviously this doesn't magically save the world, but it stops them from disappearing from existence and from them being alone. But there's also another bigger way of looking for potential antidotes through the virus itself. I think the virus could be classed as a pharmakon. In Greek, the word pharmakon literally means both a remedy and a poison, depending on the dose and context. So the virus is a pharmakon because it ended war and hunger. So it's like a medicine. And of course, they all say that they're at bliss and happiness. So the remedy of their human suffering. But it also wiped out individuality and autonomy. So it's a poison. So maybe the end game isn't destroy the joined, cure the virus, but it's more about learning how to take some of what the hive mind has to offer, like maybe the shared knowledge, loving everyone equally parts, while still defending the right to say no, where you're allowed to be wrong because that's your right as an individual. You can say what you think, you don't have to do what they tell you, and you get to be separate. Like taking just enough belladonna to help relieve some of the pain, but in controlled measurements so that you don't let it end your life. Or maybe there is no antidote. There is an option where there is no cure. This is just the state of the world now. So the only solution available to Carol, Manousos, the other immunes, becomes who you choose to stand next to when you drink whichever poison you pick. And that would mean the antidote isn't a substance at all. It's about human connection. That Carol and Manousos coming together becomes the antidote that they need, even though it's not the antidote that the world needs. So where does all of this leave us now? We've talked about the painting itself, the 2 blooms, one open and one more turned away, how Carol became the only perceiver, the only person who can make the painting mean anything during a time of a 40-day isolation, which was her chosen poison at the time. We've explored the Belladonna plant, a beautiful woman, but a deadly nightshade, another poison option. We've seen how Manousos has his own poison of choice in the form of a kind of absolutionism, an all or nothing mentality. But where can we go from here? Where is the story heading? Well, I'm about to mention the title for episode 9 because I think it wraps all of this up really neatly. So if you don't want any kind of spoiler at all, then click off this video now. Okay. So episode 9 is titled La Chica o el Mundo, which means the girl or the world. So after everything we've covered in this video, we can see how the girl has to be Zosha, the Belladonna made human, the one who can offer you a mind-altering substance, giving you the solution of you don't have to be alone anymore. And of course, the world represents everything outside of the hive mind. The immunes, the possibility of a cure, of reversing all of this, the chance that humanity can be returned to how it was before. And of course, Carol is the key to being able to do all of that. As I mentioned in my video for episode 6, I think Carol is the key because the solution to Unglu the Joined is hidden in her book, The Blood Song of Waikaro, in the excerpt that Apple released. So you should go and check out that video if you haven't seen it so that you can hear more of my in-depth thoughts about how all of this connects. But I think the title for episode 9 is basically spelling out Carol's choice before she goes on this "the solution is within me" journey, where first she has to make the choice that will not only decide her own fate, but the fate of humanity. Which means the final 2 episodes, I think, will be about Carol becoming initially more open to the others, and us watching how far she's willing to go with this openness, this acceptance of this particular poison, and whether Manousos can get there in time to offer her an alternative option, and maybe even the antidote. But anyway, those are just my thoughts and theories after watching episode 7 of Pluribus. That basically Carol now has to choose which poison she's going to drink. But what do you think? If you were in her position, what would be your poison of choice? Do you think there'll be an actual antidote to the poisonous virus? Or will the antidote just be the last remains of real human connection that's left in a world full of poison? Let me know your thoughts and theories in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe give it a like so we can forever be mere mortal subjects to our almighty YouTube algorithm. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't already so you can see more of my Pluribus takes. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Lady pirate they sent? Oh, hi. Hey, Carol. We just want to make you happy. Blah, blah, blah. It's just, life is one big, long, sunshiny walk in the park when you're one of us. Woo!